Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be making some edge grain cutting boards and this edge grain charcuterie board. I'm making 6 total. I had 5 made previously, but today we're going to make 6 and add them to the 5 that I had before. And we're going to go through the whole process of putting them together and finishing them in all of it from start to finish. So stick around and I hope you enjoy this video. Okay, so I can't start making any cutting boards until I've got some wood. And we just came back from the hardwood dealer yesterday. It was an expensive trip, but I've got walnut and cherry and padauk and African mahogany and maple and zebra wood. We came back with all kinds of stuff yesterday because we have a ton of orders to fill. So with that said, I need to make a set of boards, and I don't know how many I'm making just yet, but I know these boards, ultimately, I want them to be 12 by 18 rough. We do ship these, so generally I'll shave them down a little bit, like maybe 11.5 by 17.5, somewhere in that neighborhood, so they fit into one of those USPS, if it fits, it ships boxes. Because that's pretty cheap to ship that way. So, but rough, I want 18 by 12 so that I have a little bit of room to work with. And then we're going to make these boards, we're going to aim for an inch thickness, which means I'm going to cut most of my wood at 1.25 inches, just so that I have enough on each side for any errors, for sanding, for leveling things out. I shouldn't have to use more than 1/4 inch in total to get the board where I want to get. But the first thing is we've got to cut down our wood into at least our rough lumber into at least 18-inch pieces so that we can start squaring it up and getting it ready. Okay, so I've cut myself several pieces of, I've got cherry, some very rough walnut, some rough padauk, and some straight line maple. And I've cut myself, I think, enough for 6 boards. And how do I know that? Or how do I figure that? Well, I can come here and I measure. I've got 2 solid layers here of basically 42 inches, so each layer is 42 inches by 18 inches deep. So if we do 42 by 18, that's 756. We've got 2 full layers, so that's 1,512 square inches. Okay, then we've got 2 basically 18 by 5, so 15 by 12 plus 150. 1512 plus 150. 1,662 square inches is what I have here. Now, I'm not making face grain boards here, I'm making edge grain boards. So this 4/4 lumber that I've got here, we're going to turn up on its edge, and we're going to make this 1 inch thickness. We're going to use 1.25 inches, rough anyways. And so I'm guessing around 20% waste. So if I multiply that by 0.8 to get 80%, I've got 1,329 at least square inches here on the wood that I've got available. So divide that by 144, which is a square foot, and you've got 9.23 square feet. We're going to turn it up on its edge, right? So we're going to have to divide that by 1.25 inches. Or I'm sorry, 1.5 board feet per, since it's a 12 by 18 board, that is 1.5 board feet. So we'll multiply or divide that by 1.5, and it gives me 6.15. So basically, I've calculated out my board footage here in an attempt to kind of guess whether or not I have cut enough wood to make 6 boards. And I think I have, because I've put in about 20% of waste there. I want to mention that on most of these boards, 3 of these boards, when I cut them down to 18-inch lengths, I had these end sections that were 25 or 26 inches. And I didn't want to cut 18 inches out of a 26 or a 25-inch board, because then I've got 8 or 9 inches of 7, 8, 9 inches worth of scrap, and you can't really make a whole lot out of scraps that are that short. So what I've done is I've put those aside over here. These are a bit longer, and we'll use these, I think, to make a nice charcuterie board. All right. So now that I've got all this wood cut down into 18-inch sections, each and every single one of these boards needs to be milled down. We need to make sure that they're all square and parallel on both faces, square at least on one edge, so that we can run it through the table saw. And my walnut is really rough, my Paducah is really rough, the cherry and the maple are both straight lined, but nonetheless, all of this needs to be run through the jointer, then through the planer, and then we can start cutting these down on the table saw for our final project. Okay, so I've got all my lumber pretty much milled to where I want it. 2 things you might have noticed. One, I did not start on the joiner. I actually started on the planer. I planed each face to get both faces parallel. And the reason I did that is because a lot of these boards are too big for my joiner. So I planed both faces, and as long as I keep those faces, now that they're parallel and flat, as long as I keep those faces up against the back fence of my joiner, which I know is 90 degrees, then the edge I cut is also going to be 90 degrees, and I can get a square cut that way. So that's a little abnormal. Most people start on the joiner, then move to the planer. I did it the other way around. I started on the planer and then moved to the joiner. Same thing. The second thing you might have noticed is that it appears as though I have a little bit more wood than I started with, and you're right. I went through my scrap pile looking for pieces that were roughly 18 inches long that I could incorporate into these boards. I did find some African mahogany. I found some extra cherry. I found some extra walnut. I found a couple pieces of maple. I found another piece of Paducah, and milled all that down together. So all of this is now milled and square. So what I need to do now is I need to start cutting these into the rows that are going to be the rows on the cutting board. I'm going to cut these at 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches, I should say, because that's going to be my height as a rough board. And then some of these I'm going to rip lengthwise to get some thinner strips, basically to add some visual appeal to the boards. I don't want every board in the cutting board to be 3/4 of an inch wide. That's a little boring. So I will rip some of these. Maybe I'll do some at 1/4. Maybe I'll do some at 3/8. Maybe I'll do some at 1/2. I'm going to mix it up just so that I have a lot of different pieces to work with and put together to come up with something that I think is at least visually appealing. So let's go to the table saw and start ripping these down, all of this down to 1.25 inches. right, so excuse the noise, but I have my dust collector on. I've cut everything down to 1.25 inches, and I counted up all my pieces. I've got 27 cherry, I've got 20 maple, I've got 11 walnut, I've got 4 mahogany, and I've got 8 Paduke. Now what that means is that once I start putting these together, I'm gonna run out of pieces of Paduke, of mahogany, and of walnut, because I have far more pieces of cherry and maple than I do the others. Now I'm not looking to make this exact, but I want this to be a little closer. So on my walnut, I think I'm gonna take a portion of them and double them. That is, I'm gonna rip them down the center, maybe halfway, or maybe I'll for interest, maybe I'll do I don't know, a fourth on one side, or 1/4 on one side, 3/8 on the other side. I don't know. I'm just going to trim them down into more pieces so I have more individual pieces to put together the board. The walnut, I'll probably more than double. The mahogany, we're probably just going to run out of. I'm not going to have enough for all the boards. And then the Paduke, I'll probably try to at least get close to tripling that number, so that we have, or that I have, a lot of pieces to work with when putting these boards together in different configurations. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to pick out some of this wood and start doubling it or tripling it. Okay, so I pulled out 5 of the Paduke strips, all 4 of the mahogany strips, 5 of the walnut strips, because I wanted to leave 6 total strips of the walnut if I can make 6 boards. So each board has a thick strip of walnut in it. And then I took out 5 maple from the stack as well to try and double. And we're going to try and get just closer to that that even number of pieces. So I'm just going to start ripping these at different widths and lengths, or different thicknesses, just for aesthetics purposes. It is a bit of waste, but it's worth it because you're going to come out with something that looks so much better. It's not going to be, each row is not going to be just so redundant. You're going to have some nice pieces of thin material in there, some nice pieces of thick material in there, and visually it's going to be a lot more appealing than a board that has all the rows the same thickness. So let's rip these. Okay, so I've got all my strips cut. A lot of these strips are the original. They're the original 4/4 or 3/4 inch that I did not rip down any further. And then I cut a number of these. Remember, we did the Paduke, we did the mahogany, we did the walnut, we did some maple. We ripped those down to some thinner strips. I cut some at 5/8. I cut some at 1/2. And because all these boards are different thicknesses, I ended up with a lot of offcuts, a lot of strips that were between 1/8 and 1/4 in those 3 or 4 wood types there. Ultimately, what I've ended up with is I've ended up with 28 cherry. I added 1 cherry because I don't know if you saw it when I was cutting it before. I did set 2 aside. They just didn't pass quality. 1 I can't use. The other one I could use, but I had to rip it down and rip off some of the gouging that was in the wood. So I've ended up with 28 cherry, 26 maple, 16 on the walnut, 7 on our mahogany. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 on the mahogany. Knew that math didn't turn out right. And then 16 on the Paduke. And the Paduke is such a bold colored wood. that it doesn't take a whole lot to really make your board stand out, to just add that little touch of color. So now that I've got everything basically cut, it comes down to starting to put it together in a way that I think looks good. So I'm going to start building all these boards and just mix and matching what I have available, trying to pull from each group kind of evenly to make 5 or 6 very different boards from one another. So let's do that. Let's just start designing some boards. All right, so I've got all of my 6 boards laid out here. I was a little short, and that's because in my calculations, I estimated 20% waste. It really should have been about 30% because of the extra 1/4 inch that I cut on these for the height, so I can get down to 1 inch, plus all of the ripping I did to get these thinner strips. So my waste is probably closer to 30%, which sucks. But ultimately, what I had to do was I got another 18-inch piece of walnut, which was 18 by 9. And then I found a piece of Purple Heart here, which was 18. I cut it 18 by 5. And between those two and a couple scraps of maple I found laying around, I was able to cut some extra color in here with the Purple Heart. Each board's got at least, each board has one. Each board has one little glint of Purple Heart in it. And then I fit the extra walnut and maple in where it seemed appropriate. So I've got these 6 boards all done. Now it's really just time to glue them all up. So let's do that. Okay, I'm going to start gluing this up. It seems like in our shop, we've always got something that is a bottleneck. And yesterday we took care of a big bottleneck that we had, or that we have in this shop, which was sanding. We did pick up a drum sander yesterday, which is going to make our lives a lot easier. However, I have a second bottleneck. And that second bottleneck is that we just don't have enough clamps. I have a ton of clamps around here, but as far as the parallel clamps and the pipe clamps go, I've only got enough really to glue up 3 or 4 boards at a time. So that's one bottleneck for us. We're going to need to get some more clamps, but they're so freaking expensive that for now we're just going to live with it. So let's go ahead and get this board glued up. I'm going to start by laying everything on its side and then using a brayer along with my glue to evenly coat the surface of each board. And then if it looks like I'm going to need it, I'll put in some cauls. If it looks like everything fits together and I'm not getting any bowing or cupping, then I won't use them. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. All right, we're back. So I've got all 6 boards glued up, and if you remember when I cut the wood for the 6 cutting boards, I had some pieces left over that I wanted to make into a charcuterie board because they were just a little too long to cut to 18 inches and then have to waste that extra 7, 8, 9 inches that was on those boards. So I cut those up and I glued those together as well in this board. And I also have here 5 boards that I made the other day. These are all ready for the same thing. They're all ready to be trimmed down and they're all ready to go through the planer. Now, since these are edge grain boards, I'm sending them through the planer. I'm not going to send them through the drum sander. If these were end grain boards, you'd want to do the opposite. You'd want to run your end grain cutting board through your drum sander, not your planer. That's a great way to explode either a board or a planer. So end grain, drum sander; edge grain or face grain, planer. So let's get these all trimmed up. I'm going to square up the ends, and then we're going to send them through the planer. All right, so I've got everything squared up and planed. I lied to you. I do have one end grain cutting board here, but this has already been through the drum sander. All I had to do was clean up the edges and the ends. But here's what they look like. Here are the different designs. These are the ones I made a few days ago. My son really loves these. It's a mixture of cherry, walnut, and purple heart. It's got this kind of dark feel to it. Once this gets oiled, it darkens even more, and it's just got this very noir, kind of goth, I don't know, feel to it. My son loves them. My son's friends love those colors. Here's your standard cherry, Padauk, maple, and walnut. Here's that charcuterie board I had mentioned. It's purple heart, walnut, maple, cherry, and it's 26 inches long. We'll use this for a charcuterie board. And then here are the big, remember I said I wanted to go 12 by 18. That is not what ended up happening. What ended up happening was I got 11. I got 11 by 17 and 7/8. I wanted this finished board. I want this finished board to be 17.5 inches long. So lengthwise, perfectly happy. I'm a little short on the in this direction. I wanted 12. I got 11. Just because I ran out of the wood that I cut, and I didn't want to cut into any more because I have a lot of other projects I need to do. But the good news is remember I was aiming for 1 inch thickness on these, and I managed to glue them up pretty well, to the extent that each one of these boards is a little over 1 inch and 1/8. So that turned out pretty well. There's one. There's 2 of 6 there. 3 of 6. Like I said, each one of them has a little glint of purple heart in it somewhere. But each board is different. Each board is put together different. It looks slightly different. I know there are a lot of guys that will a lot of people that will glue up entire long sections of board and then cut them into basically identical cutting boards. I don't like to do it that way. I like to make them one at a time. It does take longer, but then every single board that comes out is unique, and you don't get caught. You never get caught at a crafts fair or a farmer's market, and so you say, "Oh, that's the same board that's over there." You just, you've got an assembly line or something. No, I make them all unique. I make each one different. So here they are. What I need to do now is these are pretty close to done. Some of these will get feet, some of these will get juice grooves, some of these will get handles. It all depends on the customer. But what all of them need right now is a round over. And I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch round over, and I'm going to round over all of the boards here in preparation for their final treatment. All right, so I've got all of my boards rounded over. It's I think I said 1/4 inch, it's a 3/8 inch round over that I've got on the router right now. Tops and bottoms, all sides. And now I'm just gonna hit these with 120 sandpaper. And then after that, we want to take a damp cloth and run it over each board, the face of each board, all the faces of the boards, to raise the grain up. And you only have to do that once. Once you raise that grain up one time, it's not going to really raise again. So we're going to raise the grain up after we sand to 120, and then we'll let that dry, and then we'll hit it with 220 to get our final smoothness. Now, I've seen people that live with me, actually, I have seen them take the whole board and submerge it in water. So that's something I like to do. I'm really just popping the surface grain, so I don't see the point in that. But we're using a high quality wood glue, so theoretically that should be okay to submerge the whole thing if you want to. I personally don't like to do it that way. We're just going to do the surface. So let's get to sanding. All right, so I think the only thing more boring than sanding is watching someone else sand, so I did spare you that torture. But everything I've got now sanded to 120. And now what we need to do is we need to stand this grain up. And to do that, and you'll see what I mean if you haven't done this before, these wood fibers are all held tightly together. But with just a little moisture from a damp cloth, we can get those wood fibers to raise up a little bit and basically release some tension in the wood. That's going to raise up the grain just a little bit, and it'll only do that one time. And then we're going to sand it with 220, and that'll be our final sand. And you don't want to go crazy when you're popping your grain. Just take a damp cloth and just very quickly just kind of run it. Make sure that you get it damp. There's no need to submerge the whole board, in my opinion, even though some people do it. But really, you just want to give this a light, just like so. Okay, and then you're just going to set this off to the side and let it dry out. And then once it's dry out, we can sand it with basically 220 grit, and we're done. Okay, so I've had these drying now after popping the grain about 25-30 minutes. And they're dry to the touch. If you don't know if your board is dry enough to sand yet, if it's cool to the touch when you touch it, it's still damp. These have all come up to room temperature and they feel dry. And you'll notice if you run your hand over the grain of the board, it is no longer smooth like it was when you sanded it down to 120. And that's because we raised that grain. We're going to sand this down now to 220. And the only thing left to do after that is to give these a bath in mineral oil, and then finish them off with a mixture of mineral oil and beeswax to keep that moisture in. Again, I'm not going to make you watch me sand. I'm going to go ahead and sand all these to 220, and then we'll start giving some baths. Okay, so everything's now sanded down to 220. I've done a final quality assurance check on them. I did have to pull out 2 boards because I had what looked to be possible glue failure lines. And I don't want to send that out to a customer, even though it'll probably hold. They probably would have been okay. I'm going to pull them off. I'm going to rip them down the glue seam and re-glue them up. So those 2 aren't in here. If you've been counting. So now all that's left to do is for them to take a bath, and we use whatever we can get. You can get, usually I get the mineral oil off of Amazon, and it comes in this gallon jug. I think it's $20-something. But in a pinch, you can just go to Walmart, Walgreens and get this the store brand mineral oil. I will tell you this about this particular Equate mineral oil. This stuff is super thick compared to this mineral oil or the mineral oil that you can get at Tractor Supply or one of those places. It's super thick. It takes a long time to soak into the board. It takes a long time for it to leach out of the board as well, which is kind of a nice thing. But overall, this is a little more of a pain to deal with, but it will do in a pinch. We're going to soak every board in mineral oil, and just very quickly, no more than 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then we're going to put them up here to dry or to leach out any excess. And then what I'll do is I'm going to take basically a 1 part beeswax, 3 parts mineral oil. We'll melt that down and get a nice mixture on the stove, and then that'll be the last coat that we buff onto these boards, and it'll give it a nice soft feel. The beeswax will also help to keep that mineral oil in there a little bit longer. So let's go ahead and give all these a bath. Well, all right, there you have it. Not bad for, basically 4 or 5 days worth of work. Like I said before, we've still got to, I'm going to let these drip a bit. I've got to refinish my workbench anyway, so I'm not real worried about the oil getting on here. I'm going to, later on today, I'm going to sand this whole thing down and lay down some new coats of poly. But I'm just going to let these drip a bit, let them leach out some of that excess mineral oil that's in there. And then, like I said, 1 part beeswax, 3 parts mineral oil. We'll melt that down, and then we're just going to buff each and every one to give it a nice soft feel and get that beeswax in there to keep that moisture in these boards to keep them lasting a very long time. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, please hit the like button and subscribe. We're trying to put out a video at least once a week right now for something new, and we appreciate your support. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.